Mark Rogers TV going under the radar in the ACC for a pretty important Coastal Division matchup with Duke traveling to Virginia Tech. The Blue Devils in the top 25 for the first time since the last time they played. They are 5-1, 2-0 in the ACC. The Hokies come in hobbling a bit at 3-4, 1-2, but if they can get a win and get a little bit of help, they can find themselves back in the Coastal race. We bring in a Mike McDaniel of Inside the ACC to help us break it down. Mike, of course, we appreciate the time. Let's start with the Blue Devils. Not the sexy pick in the Coastal Division, but certainly a team that's very sound, very fundamental. David Cutcliffe doing a tremendous job of putting this program together and on the map. Thomas Sirk at quarterback, 7 touchdown passes. So they have a sound offense. It's not going to blow anyone away, but let's start with the Duke offense.
All right, so with Duke, they haven't been the sexy pick now for the last 3 or 4 years, and they've kind of always been in contention here of late in the Coastal Division that's been wide open, and as wide open as it's been for a really long time. And looking at Duke's offense, they're never the sexy pick, but they, for whatever reason, they keep getting results. And Thomas Sirk, he's had a great year so far. He's thrown 7 touchdown passes and really commanded that offense in a way that wasn't necessarily expected as he was taking over for Anthony Boone. He was always known as a pretty good runner, and he's continued that stretch this year, 325 yards rushing on the season thus far and a couple touchdowns on the ground. So he still produces the running threat that Duke has hoped for, but throwing the football is where he's kind of excelled. He's thrown for over 1,200 yards and 7 touchdowns. So, Duke offensively is not going to blow you away, but their execution is always sound, and fundamentally they're always seem to be making the right play, and they don't really shoot themselves in the foot and make a ton of mistakes. And David Cutcliffe always has the Blue Devils extremely well coached. So when looking at the Blue Devils, they're as good a pick as any to be in the Coastal race, but they're never the sexy pick because they're not going to blow a lot of teams out.
Hey, Mike, when you survey the offense, they distribute the ball all over the place. So there's not one guy that you say, okay, if we lose him, the season's shot offensively. They're all over the place. Shaq Powell's a guy that we know from previous seasons, 302 yards rushing, 4.4 per carry. Also helps out in the passing game with 19 receptions. Actually, if you look at Duke's productivity in the passing game and you talk about Sirk's ability to distribute the football, you've got Janelle Barnes with 20 receptions, Max McCaffrey, TJ Ramond, and Shaq Powell all have 19, and Sean Wilson chips in with 13. So it's a Duke offense that doesn't rely on one guy in particular, although, again, Shaq Powell running and receiving would certainly be the guy. If you look at the defense, it's been sound. Again, not a ton of guys that are going to wow you on the stat sheet, but at the same time, it's a defense that has played extremely well to complement an offense that's not going to score a ton of points.
Yeah, Virginia Tech has improved rushing the football over the last couple of weeks, so it's going to be interesting to see if they can keep up that same production on Saturday. Duke's going to be without defensive end Kyler Brown. He's out for the game with a knee injury, so that's a veteran presence there on the defensive line that won't be in the lineup for the Blue Devils on Saturday afternoon. But to date, Duke has played very well. Through 6 games, they're 4th in the country in total defense. So that kind of took me by surprise when I took a look at those statistics. Duke's only giving up 3.82 yards per play and 252 yards per game total. Now, some of it is a token of who you play. And with the teams in the ACC, not necessarily, outside of Clemson, not necessarily putting up a ton of points on the offensive side of the football, you wonder if that's kind of why Duke's defense is as highly rated as it is. And the same goes for Boston College, who currently sits atop all of college football in total defense. But, regardless, they have some playmakers there. Jeremy Cash, he's been fantastic. Every time you put the TV on and tune into a Duke game, Jeremy Cash seems to be making a big-time play for the Blue Devils, whether it be in the secondary or coming up and making a tackle. So the Blue Devils do present a unique challenge for Virginia Tech on the defensive side of the football, especially with the way they've stopped the run and especially with the way they've defended the pass to date this season.
Yeah, Jeremy Cash, you can certainly a playmaker on defense, 11.5 tackles for loss. You've got Dwayne Norman chipping in with 51 tackles to lead the team, 6.5 tackles for loss. DeAndre Singleton, also a guy that is very productive with 32 tackles 3 tackles for loss. Let's flip it over to Virginia Tech, a team that we really liked as a slight dark horse in the Coastal Division to get past Miami and Georgia Tech at that point. The defensive line, many of those guys looking for the NFL. The 2 corners, Brandon Faison and Kendall Fuller with NFL potential. Of course, Fuller's been lost for the season. The big news coming out of this week is that Michael Brewer's back in the lineup, and that would seem to drastically change Virginia Tech's hopes for the season and also the offensive game plan.
Well, yeah, and Michael Brewer was playing so well in the first half against Ohio State, showing the potential there that he has to play quarterback. He had some flashes of it last year, most notably in that game in 2014 against Ohio State, but throughout the rest of the season, Michael Brewer was so up and down that a lot of fans and, even the coaching staff wondered if Michael Brewer was going to be the answer heading into 2015. And the coaching staff, shuffled around a bit there throughout the spring and throughout the summer, kind of figuring out, okay, who do we want to play quarterback? We flashed some of Brendan Motley last year, in the running game, kind of as a wildcat quarterback coming in and taking snaps out of the shotgun and taking off running. But was he going to be a guy that could actually lead the offense through the passing game? And he had a couple of good games for Virginia Tech when he was kind of thrust into action, but his good games came against a Furman, against a Purdue, teams that aren't necessarily going to be competing for much of anything. Furman for obvious reasons, and then Purdue is a bottom feeder in the Big Ten, although they have improved a little bit from years past. But that's where Brendan Motley's good games came. And, he played well a couple of weeks ago against NC State, but once again, we don't really know, what the Wolfpack are at this point. And after the 3 turnovers last weekend against Miami, Michael Brewer came in relief late in that game, quickly came off the bench to throw a 33-yard touchdown pass in the fourth quarter to Isaiah Ford, who's had a fantastic year for the Hokies, 7 touchdown catches, leads the ACC conference. But once Brewer came in, made that quick touchdown pass, the defense gave up another touchdown late. So it was a 10-point game, and it was desperation time for the Hokies, and Brewer threw an interception. But, I don't think anybody would be stupid enough to pin that on him. It was a pretty difficult situation. You got to take chances late in the game when you're down a couple scores. So looking towards this weekend for the Hokies, Michael Brewer's back. The passing game should be improved, and rushing the football, Trayvon McMillan has taken over as the number 1 back for Virginia Tech. And over the last couple of games, he's rushed for 96 and 99 yards, respectively, against NC State and Miami. So he'll be looking to finally break into the 100-yard mark for the Hokies this weekend. And with Duke's defense losing Kyler Brown there on the defensive line, how much more successful McMillan have with him out of the lineup. So that's something I'd like to watch this weekend.
Looking at the defense, Mike, obviously this was a situation where we expected the Hokies to be much more accomplished than they have been, a potentially dominating defense. And we mentioned the injuries. Kendall Fuller, one of the best players in college football on that side of the football, gone. So it's just your evaluation of defensive play, 30 points given up against Miami. Your thoughts about where the Hokies stand halfway through the season on defense.
Well, they're 33rd in the country in total defense, and while that doesn't sound too bad, they've kind of negotiated their bend but don't break scheme here this season, which hasn't been what anybody would have hoped heading into the year. A lot of people were expecting the Hokies to be a top 10 defense once again, but losing guys to injuries. Corey Marshall there on the defensive line. They lost their starting linebacker Andrew Motuapuaka for a brief time there. Throughout the first 4 games of the year. So he was out of the lineup. He's back in now. And then, of course, Kendall Fuller is a gigantic loss just because of a player of his stature, like you spoke of just a moment ago. So, Tech has had a lot of injuries on the defensive side of the football, but they also have a lot of talent that has not played up to their potential to this point in the season. You have Daddy Nicholas and Kenna Canham, the 2 defensive ends who just really have not played very well for the Hokies, combining for 1.5 sacks so far on the season. I mean, these are 2 guys that, were supposed to lead the pass rush for Tech, and they just haven't played well. So I think it's kind of time to take a step back and wonder how good Bud Foster really is as a defensive coordinator. I know that sounds like a crazy statement, but with that, throughout the last couple of years, Tech's offense has put so much pressure on the Virginia Tech defense, and rightfully so, they have gotten tired. The Hokies defense has struggled at times, but throughout much of the season, and with all the expectations being so high, even with those injuries, Virginia Tech has a lot of depth on defense, and you have to wonder if Bud Foster's bend but don't break mentality here this season is to be questioned. And that's something that some fans have asked. And Bud Foster has had such a great track record, but through all the frustrations and all the losing that Virginia Tech has endured the last couple of years, some people are wondering, if there's a change at head coach come season's end and Frank Beamer's out the door, is it time for Bud Foster to also move on? So that's something to watch throughout the rest of the season. I don't think it's time to necessarily panic yet. I know a 2-4 record is not what anybody had hoped for to this point in the season, but I think the Hokies have a chance to salvage their year with Michael Brewer and the way he's played, the way he played towards the end of last season in the bowl game, and then playing the way he played in the opener against Ohio State and how he came off the bench admirably last weekend. And you have to believe he's less than 100% still. So I think there's time for Virginia Tech to try to salvage their season. It's not time to panic yet on defense. They have had a lot of injuries, but hopefully they can make some improvements and get that one crucial stop on defense that they've been missing over the last few weeks when they needed to stop on defense. They haven't necessarily been able to get it, but with the 3-4 record for Virginia Tech, they'll try to get back to 500 this weekend.
Duke, Virginia Tech, and Blacksburg, despite the records of 5-1 versus 3-4, this appears to be a very close game and a bit of a slugfest. Could be ugly, but very important for Duke in particular to try to continue its Coastal Division lead. Any feel for this one, Mike?
Yeah, this is a tough one to pick because Virginia Tech is at home, and I think they do have a lot more to play for than they have throughout the last couple of games. The expectations were kind of low, not necessarily for them internally as a team. I'm sure they expected to play well, and they just haven't lived up to those expectations. But nationally, once, the mentality of many writers and bloggers and those, on TV and on other various mediums throughout the media, the idea was, when Michael Brewer got hurt, what were the chances that Brendan Motley was going to actually lead this team to a respectable record? And what were the chances of Virginia Tech to win the Coastal, like some picked, and, to contend against a Georgia Tech team that has since disappointed? But I think that the expectations this weekend are high for Virginia Tech because Brewer is coming back, and he did look somewhat healthy last weekend when he came in relief. So the passing offense should get a much needed boost. Duke's losing somebody on the defensive end there. On the defensive line, Kyler Brown is a big loss. The veteran presence there, but Jeremy Cash has played so well in the secondary that I'm not sure we can necessarily count Duke's run defense out just because they lost a strong defensive player there on that side of the football. But I think I'm going to go with Duke in this one. They're playing better football right now. I don't feel great about that pick because I do think Virginia Tech will play better with Brewer. It is homecoming and it is a home game against Duke, a Duke team that has played well in the past couple seasons. So the students will get up for this game, but I'm going to pick Duke. I just think they're the better team right now. They've been more consistent on both sides of the ball, and Virginia Tech has just struggled on both sides to kind of get anything going. So maybe I'm wrong, but we'll see what happens. But I'm going to take the Blue Devils in a very close game this weekend. I think it'll be low scoring.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that if you took the recruiting rankings and also the projected NFL status of these rosters, you would see that Georgia Tech, especially Miami and North Carolina, and then to a lesser degree, Virginia Tech have the most talent. And it's teams like Pitt this year, it's Duke this year, it's Duke in 2013 jumping up and playing more fundamental football, playing ugly football, but still winning the games. And these bigger programs with a little bit better talent continue to disappoint. Mike McDaniel joining us from inside the ACC to break down Duke and Virginia Tech as the Blue Devils look to go to 3-0 in the ACC. Thanks, Mike.
All right. Thanks, Mark.